In August 24th, 410 AD, the city of Rome. For 3 days, Gothic warriors moved through the streets of Rome. They broke into palaces and homes. They stripped gold from temples. They took jewelry, coins, art, and treasures. Roman citizens hid in their homes, terrified. Some fled the city. Others were killed. Many were taken as slaves. For the first time in nearly 800 years, Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. The Eternal City was being sacked. When news reached the rest of the empire, people were shocked. They couldn't believe it. Rome was supposed to be unconquerable. Rome was eternal. Rome was the center of the world. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, said, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." My voice sticks in my throat. The city that conquered the world has itself been conquered. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. The Western Roman Empire would continue for another 66 years after the sack of Rome. The end, when it finally came in 476 AD, would be quieter, less dramatic, almost anticlimactic. This is the story of Rome's final decades. How the greatest empire in the ancient world slowly faded away, and what rose from its ashes. To understand the fall of Rome, we need to go back to the late 4th century. Back to when the empire was permanently divided between East and West. In 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius died. He had been the last emperor to rule both halves of the empire. He divided the empire between his 2 sons. Arcadius, who was 17, got the Eastern Empire. Its capital was Constantinople. The East was wealthy, well defended, and stable. Honorius, who was 10, got the Western Empire. Its capital was no longer Rome. It had been moved to Ravenna, a city in northern Italy that was easier to defend. The West was in trouble. Its economy was weaker. Its borders were harder to defend. And barbarian tribes were pressing against those borders with increasing force. Both emperors were young and weak. Real power was held by military strongmen. Often, these strongmen were themselves of barbarian origin. The most powerful was a man named Stilicho. Stilicho was half Vandal, a Germanic tribe. But he had risen through Roman ranks and become a general. He was also Theodosius's trusted advisor. Stilicho became the guardian of young Emperor Honorius and the effective ruler of the Western Empire. And for more than a decade, Stilicho held the West together through sheer ability. He defeated multiple invasions. He negotiated with barbarian tribes. He kept the Western Empire functioning despite overwhelming challenges. But Stilicho had enemies. Roman aristocrats distrusted him because of his barbarian heritage. They resented his power. They whispered that he wanted the throne for himself. Meanwhile, new threats were emerging. One of the most dangerous was a Gothic leader named Alaric. Let me tell you about Alaric because his story is important. Alaric was a Visigoth. The Visigoths were one of the Gothic tribes that had entered the empire in 376 AD as refugees. Remember, they had fled from the Huns and Rome had let them settle inside the empire. Alaric grew up inside the Roman Empire. He served in Roman armies. He fought for Rome. But he and his people were never treated as equals. They were given the hardest assignments. They were paid less than Roman soldiers. They were looked down upon. Alaric wanted respect and a secure homeland for his people. He wanted official Roman recognition. He wanted his Goths to have land and supplies. For years, Alaric negotiated with Rome. He offered to serve Rome if Rome would give his people what they needed. Sometimes Rome agreed. Sometimes Rome broke its promises. Alaric was caught between 2 worlds. He was too Roman for some Goths. He was too Gothic for Romans. He wanted to work within the Roman system, but the system kept rejecting him. In 401 AD, Alaric invaded Italy. Stilicho defeated him and pushed him back. But instead of destroying Alaric's forces, Stilicho negotiated. He may have seen Alaric as a potential ally. In 405 AD, another huge barbarian invasion threatened Italy. A Gothic king named Radagaisus led over 100,000 people into Italy. This was a massive force. Stilicho defeated Radagaisus through brilliant tactics. He trapped the invaders and forced their surrender. Radagaisus was executed. Thousands of his followers were sold as slaves or recruited into Roman armies. Stilicho had saved Italy again, but his enemies in the imperial court were plotting against him. In 408 AD, these enemies convinced Emperor Honorius that Stilicho was plotting treason. Honorius, who was weak and easily manipulated, ordered Stilicho's arrest. Stilicho could have resisted. He still had loyal troops. But he didn't want to start a civil war. He allowed himself to be arrested and was executed. This was a catastrophic mistake. Stilicho had been the West's best general and most effective administrator. With him gone, the Western Empire lost its strongest defender. After Stilicho's death, things got worse quickly. Roman soldiers, stirred up by anti-barbarian propaganda, massacred the families of barbarian soldiers serving in the Roman army. Thousands of Gothic women and children were killed. The Gothic soldiers, who had been loyal to Rome, were outraged. They deserted and joined Alaric. Alaric's army suddenly grew much larger. Alaric marched on Italy again. This time, there was no Stilicho to stop him. Alaric didn't want to destroy Rome. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted land for his people. He wanted food and supplies. He wanted official recognition. He besieged Rome 3 times between 408 and 410 AD, hoping to force the emperor to negotiate. But Emperor Honorius was safe in the fortified city of Ravenna. He refused to negotiate seriously. His advisors convinced him that giving in to barbarian demands would show weakness. After 2 years of fruitless negotiation and blockade, Alaric lost patience. In August 410 AD, he entered Rome. Some sources say slaves opened the gates from inside. Others say Roman senators negotiated to spare the city from total destruction. For 3 days, the Goths looted Rome. But by the standards of ancient warfare, the sack was relatively restrained. Alaric had converted to Christianity, as had many Goths. He gave orders that churches were sanctuaries. Anyone who took refuge in a church should be spared. Christian holy objects should not be taken. This wasn't mercy exactly. It was respect for Christian property. But it meant the sack was less brutal than it could have been. Still, the psychological impact was enormous. Rome had not fallen to a foreign enemy since the Gauls 800 years earlier. The Eternal City was supposed to be unconquerable. The sack of Rome in 410 AD shattered that illusion. If Rome itself could fall, what was safe? What was permanent? Christians and pagans both struggled to understand what had happened. Pagans blamed Christianity. They said the old gods had protected Rome, and abandoning them brought disaster. Christian thinkers, like St. Augustine, responded by writing the City of God. Augustine argued that earthly cities, even Rome, were temporary. What mattered was the eternal city of God. Rome's fall was part of God's plan. But Rome didn't end in 410 AD. The city recovered. The Western Empire continued. Alaric himself died shortly after sacking Rome, possibly from fever. His people buried him in a riverbed and diverted the water back so his grave would never be found. The Visigoths, now led by Alaric's brother-in-law Athalf, moved on. They eventually settled in southern Gaul and Spain, creating the Visigothic kingdom. This kingdom would last for centuries. Meanwhile, the Western Empire struggled to survive. More barbarian groups were entering and settling in Roman territory. The Vandals crossed the Rhine in 406 AD and moved through Gaul and Spain. By 429 AD, they crossed into North Africa under their king Gaiseric. Within 10 years, they had conquered Rome's richest provinces in North Africa, including Carthage. This was a disaster. North Africa was the Western Empire's breadbasket. It provided grain to feed Italy. It provided tax revenue. Losing North Africa crippled the Western Empire economically. The Burgundians settled in eastern Gaul. The Franks settled in northern Gaul. Britain was abandoned by Rome around 410 AD as Roman troops were pulled back to defend Italy. Local Romano-British leaders tried to maintain order, but Germanic tribes called Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invaded Britain. By 450 AD, most of the Western Empire's territory was controlled by barbarian kingdoms. The empire directly controlled only Italy and parts of Gaul and Spain. The Eastern Empire watched these developments with concern, but did little to help. The East had its own problems. It faced threats from Persia. It dealt with religious controversies. It focused on its own survival. The East did send occasional military expeditions to help the West. But these efforts were limited and often failed. The two halves of the empire were drifting apart. Then came the Huns. The Huns were the catalyst that had started the Great Migrations. When the Huns moved west from Central Asia in the 370s, they displaced the Goths. The Goths fled into the Roman Empire, starting the chain of events that led to Adrianople and eventually to Alaric. For decades, the Huns remained on the edges of Europe, sometimes raiding, sometimes serving as mercenaries for Rome or for barbarian kingdoms. But in the 430s and 440s, the Huns were united under a powerful king named Attila. Along with his brother Bleda, and then alone after murdering Bleda, Attila built a huge Hun empire stretching from Central Europe to Central Asia. The Huns were nomadic warriors. They were magnificent horsemen and deadly archers. They used powerful composite bows that could pierce armor. Their hit and run tactics were devastating. Romans feared the Huns terribly. They saw them as barely human. Roman writers described them as savage, ugly, and cruel. Attila was called the Scourge of God. Later legends would portray him as a brutal destroyer. In reality, Attila was an intelligent and calculating ruler. He used both diplomacy and military force to achieve his goals. In the 440s, Attila focused on the Eastern Roman Empire. He invaded the Balkans repeatedly. He destroyed cities. He demanded huge tributes of gold. The Eastern Emperor paid Attila enormous sums to stop attacking. At one point, Constantinople was paying the Huns thousands of pounds of gold every year. This was humiliating, but it worked. The Eastern Empire bought peace with gold and survived. In 450 AD, Attila turned his attention west. There are legendary stories about why. One says that Honoria, sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian III, sent Attila her ring and asked him to rescue her from a forced marriage. Attila claimed this was a marriage proposal and demanded half the Western Empire as dowry. This is probably romantic fiction. The real reason was simpler. The East had no more money to give. The West was weaker and more tempting. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul with a massive army. Some sources claim he had 500,000 men, though this is certainly exaggerated. But his army was huge. Roman cities in Gaul fell to the Huns. Refugees fled. Panic spread. The Western Empire turned to its greatest remaining general, Aetius. Aetius had spent years managing barbarian tribes, playing them against each other, and defending what remained of Roman territory. Aetius gathered an army. But it wasn't a Roman army in the old sense. It was mostly barbarian federates. Visigoths, Franks, Burgundians. Germanic tribes that had settled in Roman territory and now fought for Rome against the Huns. In June 451 AD, Aetius' coalition met Attila's forces at the Catalonian plains in central Gaul. This was one of the largest battles of the ancient world. The battle was savage. Tens of thousands died on both sides. The fighting lasted all day. Bodies piled up. In the end, neither side won decisively. But Attila withdrew. He retreated east of the Rhine. This was enough. The Hun invasion of Gaul had been stopped. Attila had been turned back. But Attila wasn't finished. In 452 AD, he invaded Italy. Hun forces swept through northern Italy. Cities fell or surrendered. Aquileia, a great city, was destroyed so completely it never recovered. Refugees from Aquileia fled to islands in nearby lagoons. These refugees would eventually found Venice. Milan fell. Pavia fell. The Huns moved south toward Rome. Emperor Valentinian III fled. The Western Empire seemed helpless. There was no army to stop Attila. Then something unexpected happened. Pope Leo I, the Bishop of Rome, rode out to meet Attila. What they discussed, we don't know. There are legendary accounts. One says that St. Peter and St. Paul appeared to Attila in a vision, threatening him with death if he attacked Rome. More likely, Leo offered Attila gold in tribute. Perhaps, he warned Attila that his army was overextended and suffering from disease. Perhaps he pointed out that armies that attacked Rome often suffered disasters, like Alaric had. Whatever was said, Attila turned back. He left Italy without attacking Rome. Pope Leo became a hero. He was called Leo the Great. He had saved Rome through faith and courage where the emperor and army had failed. But Attila's withdrawal probably had more practical reasons. His army was indeed overextended. Disease was spreading. And he had already gained substantial plunder from northern Italy. In 453 AD, Attila died suddenly on his wedding night to a young bride. He either suffered a nosebleed and drowned in his own blood while too drunk to wake up, or possibly his new bride murdered him. Sources disagree. With Attila's death, the Hun Empire collapsed. His sons fought over the succession. Subject peoples rebelled. Within a few years, the Huns disappeared from history as a major force. The threat that had terrified Europe for decades was gone. But the Western Roman Empire had not recovered. It was weaker than ever. General Aetius, who had stopped Attila, was murdered in 454 AD by Emperor Valentinian III. Valentinian was jealous of Aetius' power and influence. He killed Aetius personally, stabbing him during a meeting. This was another catastrophic mistake. Aetius had been the last competent military leader the West had. Someone reportedly told Valentinian, "You have cut off your right hand with your left." In 455 AD, Valentinian himself was assassinated by supporters of Aetius seeking revenge. The Western Empire now had no effective emperor and no capable general. It was collapsing into chaos. That same year, 455 AD, the Vandals came. King Gaiseric of the Vandals ruled North Africa from Carthage. He had built a powerful fleet. The Vandals had become a naval power, raiding coastal cities across the Mediterranean. In June 455 AD, Gaiseric landed at Rome with a Vandal fleet. The city was defenseless. Again, Pope Leo went out to negotiate. He convinced Gaiseric not to burn the city or massacre its people. But the Vandals still looted Rome. For 2 weeks, they systematically stripped the city of valuables. They took gold, silver, art, and treasures. They took people as slaves. They even removed bronze roof tiles from temples. This sack was more thorough than Alaric's had been. The Vandals were efficient and methodical. The word vandalism comes from this event, though that's probably unfair to the actual Vandals. They were plundering for profit, not destroying for pleasure. After 455 AD, the Western Empire was clearly dying. It controlled only Italy and small parts of Gaul and Spain. Its economy was ruined. Its military was weak. Its government was chaotic. A series of weak emperors came and went, most controlled by military strongmen. Real power was held by Germanic generals, who commanded what remained of the army. The army itself was now entirely barbarian. Germanic soldiers fought under Germanic generals, nominally serving Rome, but really pursuing their own interests. One of these Germanic generals was Ricimer. Ricimer was half Visigoth and half Suevian. He served as commander of the Roman army for 16 years. During that time, he made and unmade emperors at will. He appointed puppet emperors, and killed them when they displeased him. Ricimer was the real ruler of the Western Empire, though he never claimed the title of emperor himself. Perhaps because, as a barbarian, he knew Romans would never accept him. After Ricimer died in 472 AD, other Germanic generals took his place. The pattern continued. Barbarian generals ruling through puppet emperors. By the 470s, the Western Roman Empire was a fiction. It had no real territory beyond Italy. It had no real army. It had no real authority. The man who would formally end it was named Odoacer. Odoacer was a Germanic warrior, possibly of Syrian or Thuringian origin. He served in the Roman army and rose to command. In 476 AD, the Western emperor was a boy named Romulus Augustulus. His name is ironic. Romulus, after Rome's legendary founder. Augustulus, Little Augustus, after Rome's first emperor. But this Romulus was not a founder. He was barely even an emperor. He had been placed on the throne by his father, a Roman general named Orestes. He was about 14 years old. He had no real power. Odoacer and his soldiers demanded land in Italy. They wanted to settle permanently as federates. Orestes refused. So Odoacer and his troops rebelled. They captured and executed Orestes. They marched on Ravenna, where young Romulus Augustulus lived. On September 4th, 476 AD, Odoacer forced Romulus Augustulus to abdicate. He sent the imperial regalia, the crown and purple robes, to Constantinople. The message was clear. There would be no more Western emperor. The West acknowledged the Eastern emperor as the sole legitimate Roman emperor. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy. Not emperor. Just king. He would rule Italy, but he acknowledged the supremacy of the Eastern emperor in theory. This was the end of the Western Roman Empire. Not with a dramatic battle. Not with the sack of Rome. Just with a boy emperor being forced to retire. And that boy's name was Romulus. Rome began with Romulus and ended with Romulus. History has a sense of irony. But here is the interesting question. Did the Roman Empire fall in 476 AD? In one sense, yes. The Western Empire with its line of emperors ended. No one after 476 AD could legitimately claim to be Roman emperor in the West. But in another sense, the answer is more complicated. The Eastern Roman Empire continued. Constantinople remained the capital of a Roman state that would last for another 1,000 years. We call it the Byzantine Empire, but they called themselves Romans. They saw themselves as the continuation of the Roman Empire. And in the West, Roman civilization didn't disappear in 476 AD. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman rule were not completely alien. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Burgundians, Franks. These peoples had lived inside the empire for decades. Many had served in Roman armies. They had absorbed Roman culture. Most of the barbarian kings claimed to rule on behalf of the Roman emperor in Constantinople. They used Roman titles. They employed Roman administrators. They maintained Roman laws. Odoacer himself governed Italy using the existing Roman administration. He kept Roman laws and institutions. Daily life for most people in Italy didn't change dramatically. The Catholic Church survived and grew stronger. The Pope in Rome became an increasingly important figure. As political authority collapsed, religious authority filled the void. Latin continued to be used in the West. It evolved into the Romance languages: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. These languages are all descended from Latin. Roman law continued to be studied and used. In the 6th century, the Eastern Emperor Justinian would codify Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis. This legal code would influence European law for over 1,000 years. Roman engineering and architecture influenced medieval building. Roman roads continued to be used. Roman aqueducts still carried water. Roman buildings were repaired and adapted. So the Roman Empire fell, but Roman civilization continued in modified forms. Why did the Western Empire fall? This is one of history's biggest questions. Historians have debated it for centuries. Some say it was military defeat. Barbarian invasions overwhelmed Roman defenses. Some say it was economic collapse. The loss of tax revenue, especially from North Africa, made it impossible to maintain the army. Some say it was political failure. The government became corrupt and ineffective. Emperors were weak. Power was held by generals pursuing their own interests. Some say it was moral decay. Romans lost their old virtues. They became soft and decadent. Some say it was Christianity. The new religion made Romans less willing to fight. It focused attention on the next world rather than this one. Some say it was lead poisoning. Romans used lead pipes for water and lead containers for wine. Chronic lead poisoning might have affected their health and fertility. Some say it was climate change. Colder, wetter weather reduced agricultural productivity. Some say it was disease. Repeated plagues weakened the population. The truth is probably that all these factors contributed. The fall of Rome had no single cause. It was the result of multiple problems accumulating over centuries. The empire became too large to defend effectively. The borders were too long. The enemies too numerous. The cost too high. The economy couldn't sustain the military spending needed to defend the empire, especially after rich provinces like North Africa were lost. The political system broke down. In the later empire, emperors were usually generals who seized power by force. There was no stable way to transfer power. Civil wars became common. The army changed. It was no longer made up of citizen soldiers defending their homeland. It was professionals, often of barbarian origin, fighting for pay. Their loyalty was to their commanders, not to Rome. But perhaps most importantly, the division between Roman and barbarian blurred. By the 5th century, there were barbarians serving as Roman generals and Roman senators. There were Romans living under barbarian kings. The question wasn't whether barbarians would conquer Rome. The question was whether this change from Roman rule to barbarian rule even mattered anymore. For the aristocrats in Constantinople, it mattered. They saw 476 AD as a disaster. But for a farmer in Gaul or a merchant in Italy, daily life continued much as before. They paid taxes to a different ruler. But they still farmed their fields or sold their goods. The empire didn't fall suddenly like a tree being cut down. It faded gradually like the sunset. Slowly, imperceptibly, until one day people looked around and realized it was gone. What was Rome's legacy? What did Rome leave to the world? First, law. Roman law became the foundation of legal systems across Europe and eventually the world. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, and the idea that laws should be written and applied equally. Second, language. Latin evolved into the Romance languages spoken by hundreds of millions today. Even English, a Germanic language, has enormous Latin influence. More than half of English words have Latin roots. Third, engineering and architecture. Roman roads, aqueducts, and bridges remained in use for centuries. The arch, the dome, concrete. Roman engineering techniques influenced building for over 1,000 years. Fourth, the alphabet. The Latin alphabet is used by billions of people today. Fifth, Christianity. Rome adopted Christianity and spread it throughout Europe. The Roman Catholic Church preserved Roman organizational structures. The Pope in Rome claimed spiritual authority, just as emperors once claimed political authority. Sixth, the concept of empire itself. The idea of a universal state ruling many peoples under one law. This idea influenced later empires. The Holy Roman Empire, the Russian Empire with its czars, meaning Caesars. Even Napoleon and Hitler looked back to Rome. Seventh, culture and literature. Roman writers like Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero were studied for centuries. Roman history became a source of moral lessons and political examples. Eighth, the idea of citizenship. That people could be bound together not by ethnicity or tribe, but by shared legal status and rights. This was radical in the ancient world. Rome's influence didn't end in 476 AD. In many ways, we still live in Rome's shadow. Let's think about what we've learned in this series. Rome started as a small city on 7 hills. Nothing special. Just farmers and shepherds. Rome created a republic, sharing power among citizens. This republic conquered Italy through a combination of military force and smart alliances. Rome defeated Carthage in brutal wars and conquered the Mediterranean. Rome became an empire while pretending to stay a republic. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and civil wars destroyed the republic. Augustus emerged victorious and created a monarchy disguised as a republic. For 2 centuries, the Pax Romana brought peace and prosperity. Rome seemed eternal. But in the 3rd century, crisis nearly destroyed the empire. It survived but was transformed. Divided. Militarized. Christianized. In the 5th century, the West collapsed under barbarian invasions and internal decay. The last emperor abdicated in 476 AD. But Roman civilization continued in the East for another 1,000 years. And Roman influence shaped Europe and the world for centuries after. Rome fell, but Rome never died. It transformed. It adapted. It continued in new forms. The question isn't really whether Rome fell. The question is whether Rome ever truly ended. Every nation that claims to be a democracy looks back to Rome. Every legal system based on written laws looks back to Rome. Every language descended from Latin carries Rome within it. Rome is still with us. In our words, our laws, our buildings, our ideas. The Roman Empire ended. But Rome is eternal after all. Just not in the way Romans expected. D6. The fall of Rome.